John was a devoted father and husband who lived a comfortable life in a small suburban town. He had a successful career as a businessman and a loving family that included his wife, Mary, and their 2 children, Tim and Sarah. Tim was the eldest, a bright and ambitious young man who had recently graduated from college and was about to start his first job. One fateful night, John received a phone call that would his life forever. It was the police informing him that Tim had been involved in a tragic accident and had passed away. John and his family were devastated by the news, and they struggled to come to terms with their loss. John was inconsolable. He couldn't accept that his son was gone. He felt like a part of him had been ripped away, and he was consumed by grief and a desperate need for answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Tim's death, something that wasn't being revealed to him. John spent countless hours trying to make sense of what had happened, poring over the police reports and witness statements. But despite his best efforts, he couldn't find any answers. He began to feel like he was losing his mind, consumed by a never-ending cycle of grief and despair. Determined to find closure, John turned to an unusual idea. He wanted to install a camera inside Tim's coffin in order to monitor any potential signs of life or unusual activity. Despite the initial skepticism and objections from his family and friends, John pressed on with his plan, driven by his desperate need for answers. As John began to plan for the installation of the camera, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease and guilt. Was he going too far in his quest for closure? Would he regret his decision? These thoughts plagued him as he considered the implications of his plan. John's obsession with finding answers about Tim's death began to consume him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the accident that took his son's life. He spent countless hours poring over the police reports and witness statements trying to make sense of what had happened. But despite his best efforts, he couldn't find any answers. He felt like he was losing his mind, consumed by a never-ending cycle of grief and despair. He began to have nightmares where he saw his son alive, but trapped in a dark and cold place. He couldn't reach him, and he was screaming for help, but no one could hear him. He woke up every night drenched in sweat and with a feeling of hopelessness. He knew that he needed to find closure, but he didn't know how. One day, while browsing the internet, John came across a video of a man who had installed a camera inside his loved one's coffin. The man claimed that he had captured footage of his loved one moving and communicating from beyond the grave. John was skeptical, but the idea planted a seed in his mind. He couldn't shake the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to make contact with his son. John began to research the idea, scouring the internet for information on the topic. He read countless articles and watched countless videos, all of which seemed to support the idea that it was possible to make contact with the deceased. He was convinced that this was the answer he had been looking for. John knew that his idea was unorthodox, and he knew that his family and friends would likely think he was crazy. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the only way to find closure. He needed to know that Tim was at peace, and he needed to know that he hadn't been alone in his final moments. Despite the initial skepticism and objections from his family and friends, John pressed on with his plan, driven by his desperate need for answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Tim's death, something that wasn't being revealed to him. He was determined to find out what it was, no matter the cost. John had been monitoring the footage from the camera he had installed in Tim's coffin for several days, but he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. He had begun to wonder if he had made a mistake, if his grief had clouded his judgment. But then, on the 4th night, something shocking happened. The footage showed Tim's body suddenly moving inside the coffin, his arms and legs twitching as if he were trying to break free. John was stunned by what he saw. He couldn't believe his eyes. He replayed the footage multiple times, each time becoming more convinced that what he was seeing was real. He felt a mix of emotions. Part of him was relieved that Tim was alive and that he had not died in the accident, but another part of him was scared and overwhelmed. He quickly shared the footage with his family and friends, but they were skeptical. They thought it was just a camera glitch or a trick of the light. But John knew what he saw, and he was convinced that it was a sign that Tim was still alive. John immediately contacted the authorities and showed them the footage. They were shocked and began to investigate the matter and immediately exhumed Tim's body from the grave and found out that Tim was alive and breathing inside the coffin. The doctors were baffled by the discovery. They couldn't understand how Tim could have been alive inside the coffin for so long. They immediately rushed him to the hospital and did every test possible to understand what had happened. They found out that Tim had been in an adept coma caused by a rare medical condition. John was overjoyed to find out that his son was alive and safe. He felt a sense of gratitude and relief that he had never felt before. His family and friends were also overjoyed, and they couldn't believe the news. They were grateful for the second chance they had to be reunited with Tim. The story of John and Tim had touched the hearts of many people around the world. It had been a tale of hope, perseverance, and love. John had never given up on his son, even when everyone else had thought he was dead. He had been determined to find out the truth and to never give up on his son. The discovery that Tim was alive had been a miracle. It had given John and his family a second chance to be together. Tim had made a full recovery, and he was now living a normal life with his family. He had been grateful for the second chance he had been given and had never taken a day for granted.